Hello everyone, welcome. We are at the midpoint, or almost at the midpoint of learning all the Josekis in a game of Go. So this video is a little recap and a little preview. I hope this video can help orient ourselves in our learning of Josekis. I'll answer two questions. Can you master Go with only half the Josekis? And how many hours of learning does it take? So when I'm making this channel, my ambition is to contribute to the pedagogy because I haven't seen anyone else build these Joseki contents from the ground up, from beginner level to a mid-amateur competitive level. And so far, I think that's what I've been trying to do. I covered some of the basic variations of the corner start point Josekis, but of course, oftentimes it's unavoidable to talk about more complicated variations. So I think so far I've covered all the Josekis, stemming from the corner start point, from things that beginners must know, to complicated variations that mid-level amateur players or even high-level amateur players might find challenging. But you as the learner must think for yourself. You cannot just try to play out or imitate all these variations you see. You have to think about how to use them to your own advantage. And that's what we're talking about in this video. So the first question is, can you master Go with only half the Josekis? Well, it depends on how we define the word master. If it means learning everything, right, learning most of the things, 90%, 95, 99% of everything, then the answer is obviously no, because we're only covering about 50% of all the Josekis. But if we mean by master a high level of competency that allows you to play at a high amateur level, then the answer is probably yes. We're getting really close, right? So half the Josekis are enough. You do not need 100%, 90%, or 80%, 70% of Josekis. About 50% is just enough for you to use and play at a high level. So how does that work theoretically and practically? First, let's define which half do you need to learn? What counts as half the Josekis? And that includes what we have covered here in this playlist so far. And that is lesson series 500 to 510. There are 82 videos so far, and they total 19 hours. So I added up each minute and seconds, and there are a total of 19 hours already here in this playlist. And they are very detailed. They go through many, many variations. Of course, they're not meant to be exhaustive, but I think these are some of the most detailed explanations you can find anywhere on the internet in English on the corner start point Josekis. So there are the basic Josekis, which is lesson series 501. Very, very useful for beginners because these are some of the simplest Josekis, not just the corner start point, but also the 3-4 point. If you haven't checked it out, please do. Super useful. And then we covered every Joseki from the corner start point, step by step, variation by variation, and that is lesson series 502 to 510. But we're missing a little bit in half the Josekis in terms of our strategy of learning and using only half the Josekis to get to a good level. And that is, we need to learn some Josekis after corner enclosures. So not just approaching a single stone on the corner, but we need Josekis after corner enclosures, which I'll demonstrate in just a little bit. So what's our strategy? Our strategy is you can play the corner start point exclusively. Let's say if you're black in a game, you just always play at the corner start point, regardless of what your opponent plays. If your opponent also plays 2 start points on corners, then you're all set. All you need to know is Josekis from the corner start point. But you might say that is a little bit boring. What if I want to play the 3-4 point every once in a while, once every 10 games? Then I still have you covered because in lesson 501, we talked about how to defend a 3-4 corner, right? Just play the most basic responses, something like this. These are the most basic Josekis, and you'll do just fine. You will not be at a disadvantage after playing these very simple Josekis. So you can still play the 3-4 point yourself every once in a while. Now what about your opponent's cornerstones? If it's the corner start point, then we've already learned everything. You can approach, you can attach at the 3-4 point, or you can play the 3-3 direct invasion. But if your opponent makes a corner enclosure with the corner start point, then we'll need some Josekis after the corner enclosures, which are upcoming here in this playlist. What do I mean by that? If you're black in the situation, white can always, theoretically, ignore one corner and enclose the other. So how do you approach the lower left corner as black in this situation? Well, we'll need to learn some Josekis, right? Because we haven't seen a Joseki that starts with a corner enclosure. And there are ways for black to play to challenge white's influence on the lower left, as well as the corner territory, actually. And now what about the 3-4 point played by the opponent? This is, of course, the biggest weakness in our strategy. If you only used half the Josekis, because we only taught you how to defend the 3-4 corner, but when you approach your opponent, might choose something that's very, very complicated, something like this. This will take probably at least a couple of hours, I think, my guess, to explain sometime down the line, right? So there are complicated variations, right? Because when you approach, your opponent is not guaranteed to play the most simple moves. They might pincer, and there might be complications and trick moves that your opponent can try on you. So that's a concern. But for now, the strategy is, again, to allow your opponents to get to a corner enclosure. Then all we need to learn is how to approach these corner enclosures, right? So there are moves, right, for each that you can try, right? So there are all kinds of moves, actually, for you to challenge the corner enclosure. And some of these are actually informed. There are new knowledge in the age of AI. So these are actually very useful for you to know. And of course, a corner closure is far from the end of the world. You can definitely allow your opponent to do that as long as you know how to follow up and kind of contain their influence. You'll do just fine. So once again, all you need to know is actually the Josekis after the corner enclosures, after your opponent has 2 stones on the corner. You do not have to challenge the 3-4 point directly because pincers might get really complicated. So what are the concerns? Obviously, it's not a perfect approach to playing the Josekis. It's more like a thought experiment, I guess, more theoretical than practical, but I would also argue it is very practical. What about the complicated 3-4 Josekis? You don't have to play it yourself, right? Because you only use the start point. And what about your opponents? You can allow them to enclose the 3-4 points corners. But if you really want to approach, well, learn a little bit, right? Again, all you need to know is how to avoid the complications, which I already talked a lot in the corner start point Joseki videos. There are other concerns, right? What about the opponent's 3-3, 3-5, 4-5, or even 5-5 corner occupations? What are those? If you're a beginner, you probably haven't seen a lot of those. 3-3 is here, 3-5 is here, or here, right? 4-5 is this, and 5-5, which is pretty rare. Not recommended, but you might see players experiment with this. To be honest, I experimented with this for a period of time when I was little, about more than 20 years ago now. I thought it was fun, but it doesn't really give you any benefits or advantage on the board because this is just too far away from the corner. And all of these stand to lose because they lose the corner territory, and 3-3 is considered a little too low. So some professional players might still use it every once in a while, but you do not really see a lot of 3-5 or 4-5 because they stand to lose the corner territory. When you see them for the first time, it's a little scary, but once you learn how they actually work, how to approach them, how to grab the corner territory, and gain a little bit of advantage, you'll be fine. So nothing to be scared of. There are just some variations that you need to learn. And now we can kind of calculate how many hours of learning does it take. I think this is why making this channel is helpful for us to get to that answer pedagogically. So far, I have 82 videos here in this playlist, 19 hours. about 20 hours, and then we'll have Josekis after the corner enclosures. So that'll be around 1 to 2 hours. That's my estimate for now, because we'll go through a lot of variations. I don't think these are that complicated, but there are many variations. Of course, there are 8 different corner enclosures. Some are more complicated than others. So really, it's about 20 hours, 21 hours. The good news is that you don't need all of them, because a lot of those are very complicated. If you do not ever want to use the flying knife Joseki, then you can save yourself 3 hours of learning here on this channel, and many more hours elsewhere. So you can cut it in half, so that'll be 10 hours, or even just a third. That's 6 to 7 hours to cover the basics. Or it might be a little longer in real life, because my videos are edited for conciseness. If you hire a teacher to teach you, it might take even longer, but let's say 6 to 10 hours. The bad news for learners is that you never grasp everything by watching everything just once. For me, personally, I need 3 times usually to learn something. And I think that holds true for most beginners. I would say 3 to 5 times. You have to just rewatch these videos, go through the thought processes again, or watch some other sources. You just have to learn multiple times, because it's very, very difficult to hold all the concepts, all the understandings in your head after watching it once. So I would say at least 3 times. And then you have to use it in games. So that will be at least dozens of games, if not 100, 200 games, to actually practice some of the patterns. So if we do not count playing games, just learning and reviewing, right? If you times 3, everything times 3, then we'll get back to 20 to 30 hours. And if we want to have a higher range, then really it's at least 1,000 minutes, right? About 16, 15 hours to 2,000 minutes, about 30 plus hours of instruction, depending on how much of the basics you want to learn, how many complicated variations you want to get into, and how many times you need to repeat. So I think this is the ballpark to learn half the Josekis. But how do you learn it? Obviously, do not learn everything at once. You should not try to watch all the 19 hours of Joseki videos here on my channel all at once. You're not going to remember anything. These are some of the tips I often repeat and emphasize in my videos, because I want to save you a lot of time, and I want you to be as competent as possible in the game of Go. The first thing you should do is always ask why. A lot of beginners are a little afraid to ask why, because asking why in a game like Go, where only smart people play, might make you seem a little dumb, but it's never dumb. Asking why is so important. Every move has a why, especially Josekis, right? These are the perceived acceptable moves. These are all acceptable moves. And you have to ask why. You have to understand why they're played. Otherwise, it doesn't make any sense for you just to remember a sequence of moves, to remember the patterns. You won't be able to use it. And related to that is that you have to calculate on your own. Once you know why, you have to calculate a few moves on your own. If you're a beginner, play it out on your own board. If you're more advanced, just calculate in your own head and see what patterns might emerge. As you review your games, as you learn the Josekis, you have to be active. You have to do active learning. If it's passive, you will learn much less effectively. So you have to calculate some of the moves on your own and try to understand what can happen in some of those variations. And another very important thing is you have to understand the wrong moves, why some moves are not played, rather than the Josekis, the acceptable moves that are played, that are displayed in books, in tutorials, in videos. Those are just as important, and that's what I'm trying to cover more here on my channel, because the vast majority of textbooks and the vast majority of tutorials on Josekis do not cover those. They just assume that all you need to know is the correct or acceptable moves. But that's not it. I'm introducing these because I'm asking the why questions behind each move. Why not that one? Right? That seems more intuitive. That seems like a good move. Why don't we play that? Right? We have to ask those questions in order to achieve a solid understanding And once we have the understanding, we'll become much better Go players and we'll enjoy the game much more. Another very important tip is to choose your favorites. What do I mean by that? It's the ones that you can use to your own advantage, the ones that you can use regardless of what AI tells you. Because now we have AI. Of course, professional players will live by AI because every little bit of advantage in a game is very important. And millions of dollars are on the line, right, between winning and losing. But you're just an amateur player. First of all, you cannot really use AI to your advantage because you have to know how to follow up a pattern that AI tells you gives you an advantage. And second, you often do not need AI level judgment to defeat your opponent, right? It's like an overkill. So the best strategy for amateurs is really to use patterns, Josekis, that you like, that you can use to your advantage to defeat your opponent. But of course, this will change. This will evolve. The Josekis that you prefer and that are useful to you when you're a double-digit Q player will definitely be different from the Josekis that you like and you can use to your advantage when you're a lower Dan player, because your skills will evolve, your preferences will evolve, and your opponents will evolve. So your favorites will evolve as well. But at any given moment, you should have a few of your favorite Josekis to play on the corners to make sure that you do not fall behind early on in the game. And I think that's a very important strategy because most lower level, mid-level amateur players do not play Josekis properly. And that means they stand to lose and you stand to benefit if you learn the Josekis properly. So choose your favorites. There's no need to hold all the information about all the Josekis or half the Josekis in your head at all times. Choose your favorites and use them. Relatedly, you also have to learn how to avoid your least favorites. So a lot of the videos in this playlist have the word avoid in their titles. And I think that's really important. You have to avoid complicated situations that you do not want to get into. And there will be many tricks and traps that you've never seen. Your opponents are trying out these moves to fool you, and you might fall for it, but don't worry. They are finite, right? It's not infinite. They're just only so many patterns that you can learn from these corners and Josekis and trick moves and traps, and they're all learnable. So when you fall into a trap or fall for a trick in a game, come back and review the pattern and see how you would have done better. And once you figure it out, you will definitely improve and you won't be afraid of it anymore. So what's next in our Joseki playlist? As I mentioned, we'll cover the Josekis after corner enclosures first, because that will give us about half the knowledge of all Josekis. And that these are also very, very practical, especially in the age of AI. They also include some gifts from AI. So I think it's very much worth learning. And then we'll cover all the Josekis from the 3-4 point. Of course, I'm using the 3-4 point instead of the Japanese term here on my channel because my belief is that if I'm making lessons in English, I should use English as much as possible rather than using a lot of Japanese terminology that might scare beginners. And I think that it is definitely a major challenge, right, for teaching Go in English, because there are terminology that just doesn't exist in English, like something as basic as Atari. Right? But if we can just point to a 3-4 point, everybody knows what a 3-4 point looks like on the board, then I'll just use the word 3-4 point rather than the Japanese terminology that sounds completely foreign to an English speaker. So we have the 3-4 point, and we have the 3-3, 3-5, 4-5, maybe 5-5. These are relatively straightforward and simple. Maybe I'll cover these first. I haven't decided yet, but we will get to everything in the end. And how long will this take? It's anybody's guess. So far, I've made 82 videos and it's taken me almost 21 months. But of course, it will depend on how busy I am in my own life. But it is the goal to cover all the Josekis there are, or at least all the Josekis, all the variations that a competent amateur player, a high-level amateur player, will need to know. But of course, that includes all the variations that beginners, double-digit Q players, lower done, and mid-done players need to know. So thank you very much for your support. If you like these contents, please do not forget to like, subscribe, and support my channel via one of the methods in the description below. Your support and your improvement in Go are the main reason why this channel is still running. And I really enjoy getting all your feedbacks. Thank you so much.